Hello, everyone. My name is Kanissa Grant Femena, and I am the owner of Rethinking Professional Development. Today, I'm going to be talking about a very special topic that often gets very much convoluted in education, and it's executive functioning. And I'm going to apply it to how it relates to mathematics specifically. I am a math teacher, a math and science teacher at a high school, working with students who have executive functioning deficits, and I specifically target these executive functioning skills with my students to make sure that they have academic success. Now, these concepts are really general and they kind of give an overview of what executive functioning is. Each student has different needs based on what deficits they have in terms of their understanding and then also how executive functioning plays out in their education. So it's important to understand that we are in this time that we're going through this presentation, going through some of the general overview concepts that are covered in executive functioning studies and research, and also being able to provide an equitable experience for all students means that making generalizations can sometimes be very dangerous and detrimental to our students. So I'm going to provide a framework where you can apply some of the equitable practices to your classroom while also learning about some of the research and general concepts in the executive functioning kind of world. So, just to put some rationale to why it's important to understand executive functioning as a teacher, and especially as a math teacher, because we do go through problem solving skills and critical thinking, is I have to provide some kind of framework for you so that you understand. So, I'm going to go through some of the major concepts that are covered in executive functioning. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define what executive functioning is. It's one of those concepts that is very broad, but I'm going to, throughout this presentation, bring that in and narrow it down so that it's condensable, so you can implement some of these strategies in your own classroom. I'm also going to talk about why executive functioning is a major issue in education. Students need to know these skills, but they are not being taught these skills early enough to actually have them be able to be successful in their middle school and high school years. So I'm providing some rationale of how important it is to actually teach this in early education. But the framework that I'm going to provide for you is so that you can implement it in a high school classroom if needed. Also, the major part of this is the behavioral correlation. So the executive functioning and behavior are highly correlated, and if we teach the executive functioning skills, it can limit the amount of behavioral issues in students because they will have the skills to be able to be academically successful. So this slide gives a general overview of all the different topics that I'm going to talk about in terms of executive functioning. I provided a diagram for you to look at that gives a general overview of the executive functioning. I'm going to apply it to how I'm going to talk about how to support students in the classroom. So let's focus on the diagram real quick. So these are all of kind of the major concepts and major focuses within executive functioning that are important for generally people to be successful in general, right? So flexible thinking, be able to adjust behavior and expectations and deal with those changes, working memory, how to keep key information in your brain and then, actually share that when you need it. The next thing is self-monitoring, being self-aware of what you're doing in the moment. Planning and prioritizing is a major one for our students, being able to set goals for themselves. Task initiation, be able to get started on tasks independently. Organizing and keeping track. Impulse, thinking about things before you do it. And then doing an emotional check, right? So also being able to read situations. I would argue that social skills are also a very play a very important role in executive functioning as well. And we know for some of our autism spectrum students, some of these emotional skills and self-monitoring skills can be difficult in terms of social situations. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of executive functioning in the classroom is actually educating the students on what executive functioning is. If they know what executive functioning is, then they will be more likely to understand why it's important, and then also integrate that into their own kind of thinking and learning. So the next part is teach to the need. Understand your students in a way that allows you to analyze exactly what they need to feel supported, and don't give them what they don't need. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Also, providing the emotional supports for students to learn successfully in your classroom. All students should be able to connect with you as the teacher and be able to learn from you. And I'm going to talk about some things that can help you be able to do that. The next thing is using different dynamic tests. In education, we have a numerous amount of assessments, and educators often go really crazy about using data. But the concept of this is actually targeting what specific needs your students need at any particular time. Their needs might be different from concept to from day to day. So using dynamic testing can allow you to assess what the student needs in the moment, or what student needs in that specific frame of time, in order to learn the concepts in your class. The next part is consistent monitoring. So you're actually looking at the student and seeing how they're improving in the classroom, and dynamic testing can also help give you that information as well, so that you are teaching the students the skills that they need to help them make them feel like they're being successful academically in your classroom. Metacognition. Actually teaching students how to think is a very important skill, specifically with executive functioning skills, because they lack the skills to be able to execute the things that I talked about in this diagram. The next thing is being able to keep your students engaged in the learning in your classroom and be able to support them throughout the process. Retention is key. A lot of the times when students feel frustration with schools, they usually avoid, they refuse, and they usually act out. So we need to really maximize the skills that we're actually teaching the students so that we can retain them in our classrooms and in our schools. The last one is stamina. Executive functioning skills are really important, but teaching them can be sometimes exhausting and tedious. So the important part is to integrate these things into the lessons and actually monitor students' success throughout the process of teaching them the skills. If students are aware that they are getting better or having some success in your class, this will increase the stamina that they will have in terms of being able to stay in your classroom and engage in the content. And I'm going to talk about some of the skills that you can utilize in your math classroom to be able to increase retention and stamina throughout this presentation. So defining executive functioning in the classroom is something that's separate. We have different types of curriculums for executive functioning. So there's things like life skills that teaches students how to open a bank account or go grocery shopping, right? But in terms of actually being in the classroom and teaching students skills, this is going to be very important, this information. So the first concept I'm going to go over is actually teaching the students the skills that they need to know for learning. So you have to teach the students organization, right? As a teacher, you need to keep yourself organized and have routines and norms in the classroom in order for your students to be able to learn how to follow them. This will give them the organizational skills they need to be successful in your class. If they know what's coming, then they'll be able to execute it a lot better. Prioritization. In classes, we often give information to our students and they're not quite sure or not able to actually prioritize or focus on a particular strategy in your class, especially in math class. What you do is during each class, you focus on one concept and then have the students learn that concept and then assess whether or not the student understands that concept. And I'm going to talk about how we do this in small group learning as well later on. The next thing is being able to come up with a strategy on how to teach students how to do the problem solving skills. I focus in my math class on teaching a strategy on how to be able to graph linear functions. So students, when they learn that concept, I provide them with that strategy, and then they implement that strategy in their own learning, in their own way. So this is also very important. As I'm going through the lesson, also another important skill for you to do while you're teaching your students is to teach them how to think about the concept. So I talk a lot, I do a lot of self-talk, which is another skill that you can use to teach your students metacognition. And I go through how I think about each problem so they can understand how I think about it and how they can think about it and some of the pitfalls that they actually have. This actually helps them solve the problems better because they're able to think about the problems and think through the problems on their own independently. Also, another important concept that really gets highlighted in terms of education is the behavioral management piece. If students are engaged in all the concepts I talked about before, organization, prioritization, strategy, and metacognition, the behavioral issues that you have in terms of like acting out or avoiding dissipates, mainly because students are focused on learning the skills and they feel successful with learning the skills in your classroom. So if you provide these executive functioning strategies in your classroom, it will limit the amount of behavioral issues and behavioral management that you have to do in the classroom with your own students. The next part is that I'm going to talk about, and this relates to my own research on how executive functioning has a strong correlation to student behavior. So as I said before, and I talked about this in the previous slide, having students who are avoiding, who do not have stamina, who are not motivated to learn overall in your class or in school, usually have not felt a lot of school success. And school success can be demonstrated in multiple different ways. Like there's honor societies, there's different things that you can get or honors you can get in your individual school, and those students usually don't get those honors, or they're looked down upon as the students who really aren't academically inclined. All students can rise to the occasion when they are provided with the skills necessary to feel successful in the classroom. So another thing is providing higher grades. When students feel successful and they're able to utilize these skills, executive functioning skills, to learn concepts, they get higher grades. And this directly correlates to feeling school success and being able to get into those honor societies and really achieve and really thrive. Another thing is having a positive outlook. Another important aspect of executive functioning skills is being able to plan for the future and set goals. When students actually feel success in school or they have success in a particular area, they want to figure out how they can pursue that area outside of the classroom, which is great because they have a positive outlook on how they can utilize the skills that they learn in the classroom outside the classroom, and this also helps with motivation. The last thing is academic confidence. When students feel like they can do the concept in your classroom, right, they gain the confidence that they need to basically do everything. So starting in the beginning of the year with teaching these executive functioning skills in your classroom can enable your students to be able to feel that academic confidence to get throughout the school year. The next concept I'm going to talk about is classroom strategies. I spent a little bit of time in the beginning talking about this, but I'm going to definitely expand on that as we go through and apply it to the needs of the students in our classroom. Now, and the very important topic to talk about here is creating inclusive classrooms, where special education students, ELL students, and students with all types of learning abilities can be able to feel successful. And then also implementing executive functioning skills within your lesson is integral to teaching them how to be academically successful. And then when students' needs are not being met, then you're going to be an advocate for your students and their needs. So you're going to have the tools and the rationale to be able to justify why executive functioning skills need to be taught in the classroom, and then also learn about how you can integrate those things into your classroom. So the first slide goes over teaching the skills. And I'm going to talk about 4 different concepts. These are not all of them, and the major ones on how to implement them in your mathematics classroom. So the first thing you need to do is know how they learn. You have to know how the students learn, and there's a number of different assessments and ways to be able to figure this out. Differentiation is also important, and meeting the needs of the students in your classroom, providing accommodations for students who are below grade level and also for students who are above grade level, and then also how to combine all of these three things into these things called inclusive small groups. So the important thing is that there's a lot of data collection and a lot of talking and spending time with students that you need to do in order to understand how they learn, right? So I want you to understand that it doesn't just happen inside the classroom. A lot of this development in terms of understanding your students happens outside of the classroom as well. So really connecting with those students and finding a way to really know what they know and really understand how they learn is extremely important, especially for executive functioning. So the first thing I'm urging teachers to do is to have a conversation with their students and be able to understand, okay, what is their cultural background? Where did they come from? What was their experiences in terms of learning the content in your class? What are their interests, right? So have those conversations around what those students are really passionate about and also really understanding their backgrounds. This leads into something I'm going to talk about later about building cultural value and also accessing prior knowledge. The next thing is plan fun activities in your classroom. So when students are doing something that's really fun in your class, then they're able to also engage, and then you're able to figure out, okay, what types of things do they like to do, and then also assessing how they think and how they learn. The next important thing for a teacher to do is actually collect and keep all of this data. So I have specific trackers that I use to be able to track how students are engaging in the lesson and things that they will need as supports to be able to provide them with the tools that they need, the executive functioning tools they need to be successful. Also highlighting and praising the students' strengths. If students are really strong in one particular part of problem solving, you need to really praise that, and I highlight that and be able to replicate that in other concepts, especially in terms of math. Math is kind of a cumulative subject, and it builds on top of each other. So if you're able to highlight, if a student knows how to, do distributive property, they're going to be able to do things like FOIL and solve quadratic equations a lot easier. So make sure you build and come back to those strengths that you have so students are actually able to feel success. Another thing is that highlighting students' weaknesses can be a problem as well, but you need to provide support and not just tell them, oh, hey, you have this weakness, and there's, nothing we can do about it, right? So the important part is actually highlighting, and identifying those weaknesses and working with students in these small group environments to be able to help them feel successful throughout the course. The next thing is differentiation. So, like I said before, accessing prior knowledge is extremely important. So being able to access the prior knowledge helps students be able, I'm going to move myself all the way over here so that you can see. Being able to access that prior knowledge is extremely important because students bring knowledge to the classroom and they have an understanding of how they think and how they learn. So being able to understand that and get that out of your students and keep track of that is very important to teach them the skills that they don't know or improve their skills even more. Also, assessing the skills consistently is extremely important. I take data in my classroom every time I teach a student. I'm tracking what are they utilizing the skills, what skills are working, and being able to differentiate those skills is extremely important because not all students learn the same. Providing visual supports like algebra tiles or different hands-on scaffolding can enable students to learn different concepts in different ways, and then also find a way to learn and do the concept that allows them to feel successful. And this also improves the stamina and retention in your classroom. Set target goals for your students that you share with your students. So in those small group settings, things that you can do is set up profiles for each student and say, I would like you to meet this goal, or we're going to help you meet this goal this week, so that they're aware that they are going to be working on these skills so that they can improve their learning and improve their overall academic success. Also, keeping track of content level growth. Be excited, praise those moments when they're able to have those growths, or when they're able to meet mastery in a concept, because students are able to see, hey, I can really do this, I can really apply this, I have the skill set. Also, cultural values should be integrated into classrooms because we teach a diverse set of students. If we just ignore the fact that, students are different, then we're not really maximizing the amount of learning that they can do, and we're not really maximizing the amount of supports we can offer our students in our classroom. So being able to go back to the slide where we're talking, having conversations, and integrating activities that our students really like and are, can access their prior knowledge, allows them to be able to feel successful in your classroom and then do well overall. So the last thing is inclusive small groups. So inclusive small groups are basically groups that are not tracked. They are not tracked groups. We don't have students who pass an assessment or got this many questions right, and then you put them with the students that actually got the same amount of answers right or understood the same concept. This actually works against students, and this makes students feel like they're smarter or dumber than other students. So tracking is not supposed to be happening in these small groups, and that's why I consider it an inclusive group. You're actually teaching students how to socially interact with different types of students, which is another executive functioning skill that I talked about earlier in terms of being able to manage emotions, think about things before they say things, and then also being able to deal with dynamic situations, being able to have that flexible thinking that they need. So as a group, you're setting up students with different abilities to help themselves out and to help each other out and be able to meet those mastery goals that they need to meet in order to feel successful. So there's this collaborative support group that's forming within your math class that you can maximize on to teach your students about the concept and help them feel successful academically. I have this new concept that I'm integrated into my own classroom, which helps with metacognitive skills and then also social skills, called math chats. And they're basically designed to help students learn how to use the mathematic vocabulary, but also do it in a way that maximizes cultural knowledge. So they're writing stories, they're using different forms of media to represent the concepts that they are learning. So this is one way of actually integrating different types of knowledge into the classroom and helping students be able to understand how those concepts can be integrated into their own cultural knowledge. Another thing is scaffolded math. I do a lot of scaffolding in terms of my classes, mainly because students have executive functioning deficits. Mainly the things that I see is with the problem solving skills, they need more scaffolds to solve more challenging problems. So with each problem, I provide a different scaffold where I show them how to do the problem. I provide them with a strategy, and then they utilize that strategy on their own. And I provide multiple strategies for one concept, mainly because it allows them to be able to have a toolbox, or have toolbox of different tools where they can actually learn the information and apply it. And some students actually pick the one that they like the most, or the one that's more fun for them, so that they're more engaged in the lesson. And then we have individual student mastery. So this is where I, as a teacher, am tracking the student's ability to be able to understand the information and execute the information on their own. Being able to solve problems independently is an extremely important concept in math, and this shows mastery. So I am taking data on how students are able to integrate these concepts that I am teaching them and using these scaffolds to be able to increase their metacognition, also improve their prioritization skills, okay, and implement strategies in my math class, okay. Also, another thing is skill building. Some students might come to your classes with not all of the skills that they need to be successful. So what you're doing in the meantime, while you're teaching them a new concept, is that you're building those skills that they need to be able to do this concept successfully. So skill building can also integrate the scaffolding and providing strategies to be able to help students learn how to learn the skills they need, and then also learn how to use the content, because there is a difference between the content and the skill. So providing accommodations is one way to actually utilize skill building, and I like to do it a number of different ways. So visual aids is my definite go-to to help students be able to understand concepts. Providing calculators to students, multiplication tables, anchor charts, problem solving skills, you provide that to them in the classroom so that they're able to learn the content, and all of these things can help students get what they need to feel successful. And then also I'm keep taking data and tracking how students are doing and how they're meeting different mastery standards. I'm going to be talking about in another presentation about how to use mastery trackers to be able to specifically target individual student needs, and how to set up goals for students that they can actually meet. So another thing about executive functioning is actual goal setting. So you as a teacher are setting goals, and the students are meeting those goals as you are providing them with the support to meet those goals. So I keep progress mastery trackers for every lesson, and every lesson has a mastery goal. I also provide guided support based on their ability to perform within the lesson. So if I see a student who is struggling with a particular concept, what I usually do is pull them into smaller groups or one-to-one and be able to support them as well. Also, there's another concept that can really be used to in classes, and that's peer aligned support. And what that means is that students are working in these small groups, and they have a variety of abilities. And what they do is they work together to be able to accomplish a goal. So if everyone's goal is to learn how to graph a linear equation, then as a peer group, they're supporting them to be able to meet that goal. So this is something that is helpful for students, because students want to connect with their peers and be able to get along with their peers, and you're providing them the support and the scaffolding to be able to do this successfully. Another one is one-to-one skill development. So for students who really needs a lot of support and needs extra attention, you're working with them in these small guided groups to build their skills and continuously assessing their skills so that they can be able to meet the mastery goals in the classroom. So you can see that there's different levels of support in terms of accommodating for students' needs. You have the guided support, which is in the whole group. You have the peer-aligned support, which is peer-to-peer, and then you have the one-to-one skill development where the teacher is providing these skills one-to-one. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this presentation and learned a lot about how to integrate executive functioning skills in your classroom. I provide a number of different materials, guidebooks, and resources for teachers, especially STEM teachers, who want to learn more about how to integrate executive functioning into your classroom, and also how to integrate culturally relevant curriculum into your classroom as well. It's about meeting the needs of all of your students and being able to support all of your students throughout their academic careers, and being able to actually have the content and have the knowledge is very important. So I provide 2 resources for teachers to be able to support their students, and also have personalized development for themselves. So you can check out the Rethinking Professional Development website, and then also the Rethinking Education website, which provides more STEM related lesson plans and for STEM classes that are related to social justice. So thank you for watching this video today, and I hope you learned a lot.